Hi everyone. So here we are for the book club interview with Jo regarding her book Back to Normal. I have my copy just here. How you doing, Jo?
I'm really well, thank you. It's nice to meet you.
Yes, it's nice to meet you too. Feels like we've been trying to arrange this for quite some time now.
I know it's been quite a while for extra circumstances, but yes, it's
That's
really
it.
nice.
But we've managed it eventually.
We have.
So I have a list of questions that we'll try and run down. If you've ever seen any of the videos before, you'll know that I go off on a bit of a tangent. So we'll try and pull it back to the book every now and again. Okay.
No problem.
So really, to start with, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I was born in Northumberland, so I'm a northern girl, but I did come down to Staffordshire when I was quite young. So I've lived here a long time. I have two grown-up boys, and I live with my husband Gaz, and we've been married 18 months now. And two beautiful little schnauzers that bark all the time, but are absolutely lovely. But yeah, worked in business most of my life, but then obviously a big change in 2018. So although I'm married to Gaz now, I was married to Jay. And Jay passed away in 2019 after being diagnosed with gastroesophageal cancer. And that is really where my journey started from, really. After he was diagnosed, my life took a completely different pathway, shall we say, and has led to me sitting here today.
And that was kind of the catalyst for the beginning of your journey then, yeah. So
It was, yeah. I mean, when he was diagnosed, it was out of the blue, absolutely out of the blue. We did not expect it. He was a fit young man. He was only 40 when he was diagnosed, so he was very, very young. Used to play football all the time, was just really fit and healthy. So won't go through it all, but basically ended up having chemo, radiotherapy. He had a total gastrectomy, which is removal of the whole stomach. And after a period of hope, unfortunately, he did go downhill and he passed away in 2019. And that's where my journey started. I just thought, you know what, life's too short. I'm going to do something. So I did. And I went back to uni. I quit my job, which everybody told me I was absolutely crazy for doing. But I went, I've got to do it. Quit my job, went back to uni, and I'm studying a degree in psychological studies. And during the last 4 years, I'm nearly at the end of my degree, which feels like it's lasted forever. I'm not going to lie. It feels as if it's going to be there forever. But yeah, I'm now a qualified grief specialist in a completely different career and married again, met my guys, and yeah, life is really good. So although I've been through so much heartbreak, it's kind of, I don't want to say the word full circle because that's probably the wrong word, but I'm in a really good, happy place right now.
good. And I suppose that nicely leads into what I was going to ask you next, which was kind of the idea for the book. But obviously, that being your passion and what changed your life around, was the book just a kind of a natural continuation of the work?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it just feels so natural to talk about this. And I think my degree is one thing. You learn about kind of the academic side of grief work and bereavement work and counselling and all of that. But they're having the real life experience is something you can't read in a book, and it's something you can't learn. And that I feel has helped the book because I've been able to write from a real personal point of view. And it is a personal book. There are areas of the book that are very personal to me, but I've always felt that I need to put them in because that's what makes it real. I can go academic and start quoting people and all of that, but people don't want to read that. They want to read what it's really like to grieve, what it's really like to have a loss so insurmountable that you can't put one foot in front of the other some days because you don't know how to move forward. And that's what I wanted to write about, and that's where the book has come from.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and I think that's very true. I a lot of my work, not so much now in private practice, but my original work was with cancer survivors and a cancer charity. That was where I started out, and I spent years volunteering in that sector because I think you're right. Lived experience is different, isn't it?
Yeah, it's massive, and I have a saying that I say to everybody, and I always say that I can't understand what you're going through because it's what you're going through. but I can try to relate to it.
Hmm.
You know, so when somebody talks to me about the pain of grieving, and they'll say to me, and you've probably heard this yourself, people will say, it hurts. You know, it's like a real pain in my belly. And my doctor doesn't believe me because it's not real. And I'm going, yeah, it is real. It's very real. You know, and hearing somebody say that and kind of saying it's okay is massive. It's absolutely huge.
Yeah. Just, I think I find that people want to know they're not alone in it, although it's their pain. They want to know that somebody actually believes them. That, yeah.
The amount of times you hear, it's probably silly, but, oh, you probably think I'm mad, but, and I'm going, try me.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm guessing I can say, no, you're not going mad, you know, and like I said, I can't understand what you're going through, for instance, if you were going through it, because it's your bereavement or your grief or your loss. But when you took those little triggers that we have in grief and bereavement, yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
I really, really get it. So that's kind of what I bring to the book, is this realness, I guess, and this authenticity to kind of say, yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. And it's you really get that when you're reading it, and you know the way you merge your stories with your story with others as well, you know, where you balance the two, it really does. Yeah, you've done it really well. It's beautifully done. And hearing that, you know, your point of view and then other people's point of view of their grief, but you really get the sense of overall how actually, although it's very individual, they're all suffering.
Yeah.
So actually, something I was going to ask you, mainly because of our careers, you know, in the therapy world, did you ever consider writing under a pseudonym? Because I know some people do to protect their own identity, and because yours is so personal.
Yeah, I don't think I ever did consider it, if I'm going to be honest, but I actually quite like my name, which sounds really silly, so maybe saying that aloud, but my surname is Goodwin-Worton, and I'm proud of that name because I kept Jay's Goodwin name, and that was always my thing. When I got remarried, I wanted to keep Goodwin, but I'm equally proud of being Worton. So it's like writing under the name Jo Goodwin-Worton, they're all my worlds coming together.
Yeah.
So I think it, you know, I didn't even think about it because I'm just proud of who I am.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's brilliant. And that's your journey, isn't it? Right there.
Yeah.
That's a
In
big
my name. Yeah.
yeah.
And, you know, I'm so proud of being a Goodwin, and I'm so proud to be married to Jay. But I'm equally as proud to be married to Gaz because he's my future now. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I like that. I'm just going to say, you did tell me before we started the interview that you had a great answer, and that is a fantastic answer. Yeah, I really like that. That's really good. So when you composed the book, did you do it with the idea for the people that were reading it, or was it just something that you wanted to do? And I know this is your second book, so obviously I know that you've got some experience in writing anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the first book was very diary-like, I want to say. It was almost like a memoir of what kind of happened during the period when Jay was diagnosed right through to afterwards with my bereavement. So I think the key thing there is just writing from my heart. I write what I believe in, and I write what I feel and what I've experienced. And I think as long as it's true, then you can't really go wrong. But the problem with that is that I have to be very honest.
Yes.
You know, and I can't gloss over some facts. I have to kind of say it as it is. And there were parts of the book where that was hard because I knew I had to be honest. But then I thought that's what maybe readers want to hear. They don't want me to kind of say, this is what it might be like. No, this is how it is, you know, most of the time. And again, it goes back to everybody's different, of course. But I think we do have so many similarities from person to person with bereavement, even though we're all uniquely different.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think as long as I kept that in mind from start to end, I didn't think I could go far wrong. But obviously that's in the reader's behold, isn't it, that one? So
yeah. No, but I think you're absolutely right. I just wondered if there's ever I don't know how to phrase the question really, but when when you sit down and you write something so personal, did you ever have to take a moment to reflect on that and go, actually, do I want this out in the public domain, or is yeah
all the time. all the time, because sometimes I'd just be writing and, you know, I don't know whether I speak for everybody here. Sometimes you can just type and you don't really think about what you're typing. You're just typing. And then you read it back and you kind of shock yourself sometimes. You think, wow, was I having a good day or a bad day that day? You know, but again, it was obviously what was on my mind, and it was obviously what I was thinking, and it was obviously how I felt. So I thought it's got to stay in, because if you go changing it, that's when it doesn't become real.
Yeah.
So it was a balance, but at the same time, I think maybe I was too honest in some bits, maybe.
I didn't feel that, but then yeah, I don't know. I didn't feel that, but then again, I suppose being in this world that you're kind of used to that. Maybe if somebody who wasn't a therapist had read it, maybe that's how they would experience it. I don't know.
As long as people can relate to it, you know, in bits, maybe not all of it. Again, we keep going back, everybody's different, and that's so important to acknowledge. But I think having that, I don't know, it's not really a unique feeling, bereavement. It is a universal kind of feeling, isn't it? It's a universal emotion, just felt in different ways.
Yes. Yeah. Actually, yeah, that's very true. And I suppose as well, because you or I are from, sounds like similar cultural backgrounds, but culture plays quite a bit in grief as well, in various different cultures. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you always have to be mindful of that.
Yeah.
I know obviously when I'm dealing with clients and things like that, you have to be mindful of anything, you know, spiritual wise, religious wise, and be respectful of that. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's very true. And I think, you know, those beliefs for people, whatever they might be, often bring them a lot of comfort, and that's quite a nice thing.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously your journey was what inspired you to write this book and your first book, but is there any other authors that inspire you to write?
Not so much any other. I didn't want to be influenced. So
No.
I've got to say no. You know, obviously I've read so many books across the last 4 years, probably way too many, and they're great. But the one thing that has stood out for me in all of those books is they were quite academically written, and they have words in there that wouldn't mean much to many people, or they go off on a very model-based answer.
Yep.
So we talk about the stages of grief,
Mm.
and they're very based on that. Whereas I wanted to come back off that and say, hello, you get up in the morning and sometimes you feel like this. Sometimes you pop the shops and you feel like this, rather than saying you're going through stages. So I think for me, coming away from the academic and just putting this kind of human-centered approach to it, I guess I want to say,
Yeah.
just really person-friendly. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. And that's yeah, the stages of grief is that's a whole different debate. It's not something I fully agree with, if I'm perfectly honest. But
I need a whole day to debate that one.
yeah,
But it is
absolutely.
out there.
Yeah.
You know, and probably yourself, you've had people say, oh, well, I should be past this stage now.
Yeah.
You know, and there's almost like a steam in the ears moment going, no, it's not like that. You know, yes, you'll go through different stages, you know, you might, but
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
it's not linear, is it? You
No,
know,
no.
minute you're over here, then you're back, and then you're forward, then you're back, and it doesn't quite work like that. And that's what I wanted to put in the book.
Yeah.
Is that life is not linear.
Well, it's
at
not, is
all.
it? And therapy is never linear. And I remember years ago, I actually had somebody present me with Kubler-Ross, isn't it? The stages of grief, and they came to a session with it, and I was like, okay, what's this for? Well, because this is exactly that. This is where I should be, and it's like, yeah, it doesn't really work like that.
Yeah.
Actually, you said an interesting thing there, because you said, you know, some days you get out of bed and you do this, and actually, some days it is you just get out of bed. That is the thing.
Yeah. And that's it. That's putting one foot in front of the other. And that's an achievement. You know, one thing I always say is that I come up with some daft things in sessions sometimes, but I'll say grief is like climbing a mountain.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can't climb to that mountain in one going up all at once. It's impossible. So why do we try and get over grief straight away? It's like climbing that mountain. It's not possible. But if we take it step by step and reach those base camps and first camp and second camp and do it at our own speed with the right equipment and support behind us, you'll get to the top.
Yeah.
But how long will it take? Who knows? It
Yeah.
might take a week, a month, a year, 10 years.
Yeah.
Everybody's different. So it's a silly analogy maybe, but it works. In my head, it works.
I really like it, and I'm something that comes up with a lot of analogies as well. And I have something similar, but it's I imagine it like an obstacle course with wars. So you go over
Yeah.
one, and you come down the other side, and then you're in the flat, and it's easier. But there is another war coming, and there is another war coming. Yeah, and that's how I see it. So no, I don't think it's a silly analogy at all. I quite like it. Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
just recognizing that sometimes it doesn't happen overnight. And another important thing as well is not comparing yourself to other people. You know, we grieve at different ways and different stages, different times. And, you know, whether you've lost somebody last week, last month, or 10 years ago, you're grieving the same. You know, and it's taking that stigma away from people and saying it's okay to grieve no matter how long, because you grieve forever. Let's face it, grief doesn't disappear.
Of course it
It
doesn't.
actually stays the same. And there's a very famous model. There's me saying I wouldn't use models, and now I'm using models.
So I think I know the one you're going to use, and I think it's very
Jars.
so yeah.
And you imagine life as a jar, and then somebody sticks a whacking big grief football in it, and it fills the jar. People think over time that grief ball shrinks, but it doesn't. It's the jar that gets big.
Yeah.
Life grows around the grief, so the grief is still as it just hurts as much on day one than day 1,000. It's just your life grows around it, and that's how I see my life.
Yes.
That's where I am sitting here today, is that my grief is still the same, but my life is growing around it, and you know, and I'm happy with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a beautiful way of explaining it, you know. And it's another one I often use is it's if you have a physical injury, you'll heal, but there'll be a scar, so the injury is always there.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah. Well, off the back of that, if you can imagine you've got this kind of injury, you also can't rip the plaster off too soon.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it will keep bleeding. So with grief, you have to take that plaster off gradually. And yeah, you're right, you'll have a scar at the end of it, but you will heal. It just takes time.
Yeah.
You know, and it's kind of just talking to people and saying it's okay to not be okay. Yeah. It's okay to feel as if you're feeling like this. It's fine. And having somebody say that makes the world a difference.
It does. Yeah. And it's that understanding as well that actually some days you might just dip back into it. Doesn't matter what time's passed. Some days there will be a trigger or a reminder or something that just makes you sit and think for a while and think, oh, actually, yeah, that's still there. And even though my life has grown around it, it's still there somewhere.
Absolutely. I mean, a silly one for me is tractors.
Okay.
Jay loved tractors.
Yes.
Absolutely loved them. And I put that in the book.
Yeah.
But every time I see a tractor, my head is automatically goes to Jay. I'm thinking, oh, what would he think of that? I would be, you know, having a laugh that there's tractors there, but it's little things. It's little things. But yeah, you can work with them. You don't work against with, you work with them.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And there is, you know, there is no way around it. You have to go through and come out the other side.
Yeah, and that's the hardest thing, especially in grief counselling and grief support.
Oh, absolutely.
You do have to work through it.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes that in that therapy, I mean, from my experience, which is more limited than yours, but I've found that just being with people in that sometimes is actually what they need.
Yeah. It's listening. It's just it's feeling that you're able to talk in an environment where you're not being judged, and you can actually say what you want to say. Because I think even if we have the most wonderful partners and spouses and friends and family, we often censor what we're going to say and how we say it because we don't want to upset them or we don't want to be judged. So there's always a little part of us held back. Whereas I think in counselling and support and therapy, you can say what you want to say.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is how you work through grief. It's just saying it out loud. Yeah. You know, do you know what? I feel really rubbish today. You know, I didn't want to get out of bed this morning. I didn't want to eat my dinner today. I'm not hungry. I miss him. I feel sad. They're powerful words. Yeah. You don't say them.
No. Well, and you're absolutely right. It is that fear of being judged or upsetting others. And so we filter it. But I think a line I've often used in session and in other interviews and videos and that is that actually the counselling relationship is sometimes the most honest relationship a client ever has.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a professional relationship, but I feel really privileged.
Mm.
Every person I speak to, every single person that contacts me about the book or something like that, I feel really privileged to be in the position I'm in. It probably sounds corny, doesn't it? But I genuinely mean it. And I'll say thank you, for putting your trust in me, or for reading my book, because it means so much.
Actually, that brings me on nicely to my next question, which is, how did you decide which stories to include in there?
It was difficult.
I bet it was.
But at the same time, I think I used everybody's apart from one.
Okay.
And that was because the lady in question wasn't quite sure. And I went, if you're not sure, no, we don't use it. That's it. But I was really lucky with the stories that I was offered, because I was offered them, I put a social media piece out saying, right, I'm writing this book. This is what it's going to be about. It's going to be about loss, bereavement. If you would be willing to share your story, I'd love to include it. And I was just incredibly lucky that I had some incredibly amazing people kind of get in contact with me and say, yeah, I'd like to share my story with you. And that was the process we went on, and we covered confidentiality. Obviously, it goes without saying. And I've changed names in the book, and where somebody said, oh, we met in such and such town, I've changed the town. We needed to keep it unidentifiable. But I was just so lucky that these people trusted me. And the stories, they brought me to tears. I'm writing them up and they're making me cry. And I know there's a couple of particularly in there that are really powerful. Really, really powerful. And writing them up, when I was speaking to them, it was hard because I didn't know what to put in, what's too much. But then I decided, this is, again, it's real. These are what these people went through and are going through. So it needs to be included. So I did. So yeah, I was very lucky. I think that's my answer. I was just very, very lucky that people trusted me.
And you're right, some of the stories are really powerful. And I read the whole book in one sitting, I should say. And having finished it that night, I was like, I need a cup of coffee now. Because it is powerful.
Yeah.
There are some very powerful stories in there. You can feel the pain coming from the page. Yeah.
But equally, I wanted to kind of show a lot of hope as well throughout the books. So although there is a lot of kind of pain throughout the book, is probably a good word to use, I also wanted to show that the people in the book have been through such hard times, really, really hard, difficult days. But many of them have come through the other side as well. And their lives, there's one lady in there that had cancer and, was really, really unwell for a long period of time, very, very young as well, and ended up having a little girl. She was told she'd never have kids. And she went on to have this beautiful little girl. And, you're reading the story thinking, wow, goodness me, this is terrible. But then there's just this most beautiful ending to her story. And it's not ended, it's still ongoing. And I just thought that was so lovely. And, the story of the elderly couple, I think that's the first story in the book. It was a pleasure to write, and I cried more during that one, believe it or not, than any other one. It was just so beautiful, of a life led, and telling that story and hearing what she was saying was just such a privilege. I can't put it into words what it meant to me. It was amazing.
Absolutely. And I don't know how you've done it, because I'm not a writer myself, but you've captured that essence in the book as well, that actually these are deeply personal stories. But like you said, there is hope at the end of a lot of them as well. And that's and it's nice to show people that actually it's going to sound a little bit corny, but it isn't dark all the time. Yeah.
It's not. And maybe half the stories, they're still going through some level of that pain, and they're still working through all of that, but they are in I want to say a better place. They're moving forward. That's what they're doing. They're just moving forward with their life. And it was an absolute pleasure to speak to them, but there were times, there were a lot of tears. I never wore mascara when I was writing them because I knew it'd be halfway down my face. But then equally, there was a few chinks of laughter in there as well, and funny stories and funny moments. And I tried to kind of anecdote them with my own experience, as you said earlier, and try and merge the two.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it is inspirational, actually. And that was, I think, probably one of the things I took away from it when I finished it, was actually, we all have these journeys, and we've all been through something, most people. And actually, it just reminds you that what's important and what isn't sometimes as well, because we do get lost in not trivia, but smaller things sometimes in life, and then you can actually reground yourself and say, actually, that's not so bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And things can change in a heartbeat.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Life is fragile.
It is. Absolutely. You took the words right out of my mouth. That was what I was going to say. One thing I often say to people, actually, is that assumption we make about life as human beings, which is, I say to my wife most mornings, I'll see you later. That's an assumption. There is no guarantee that I will see her later.
Yeah. But you can't live life thinking that you're not going to see the end of the day. But then again, equally, we can't be, for want of a word, too cocky about living forever, because we're not going to. So it's finding that balance in everyday life, isn't it? And if you'd have said to me 5-10 years ago, I'd be sitting here today in a different career, having written 2 books and doing all these things, I would have laughed. I would have said, yeah, okay. But my life did change, and it was horrible, for a very, very long time. But I feel blessed to have come through that journey. And that's what this book is about. It's about journeys in life, and that journey keeps going, doesn't it, at the end of the day?
Yeah. And actually, I think as well, there's that just that cultural thing as well, isn't there, within kind of the Western world and the UK, where we don't really confront grief and death so much. We kind of push it away. Our culture doesn't really hold death in a place where we can see it, really, and actually that doesn't help people often, because then there is no preparation for it when it does happen.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And I'm passionate about, let's talk about dying and death, not in a really miserable way. Let's just have an honest conversation about it. Let's talk about it, because if I were to die tomorrow, does my husband know what I want? The answer is now he does, because we've had that conversation. Yeah. But many people don't. And, I think it's so, so important.
Yeah. And I completely agree with you. And I mean, it's actually, yeah, my wife and I have had the same conversation for different reasons. But yeah, absolutely. And I don't think, though, that people often, when you say death, people often assume it's a negative, like you're going to talk about it in a negative way. But actually, the realization that we're not going to be here forever isn't a negative thing. It's actually a force to drive you in some respects. A realization that life is finite is quite important.
Absolutely. And I think there's I think it's a bit in this book where I asked, I think it was 20 people. I think I asked, would you want to live forever? And I was expecting kind of a 50-50 response. And you know what? Not one person said forever, yes.
There is actually, yeah, you're right, isn't there?
Yeah, it really shocked me. And I was like, wow, I was expecting somebody to say, oh yeah, I want to live forever. And one of the comments was that, why would I want to live forever? Because that means I would always be grieving for those that I love. I'd always be losing, not just people, but pets, houses, jobs, health. I'd be continuously experiencing grief. So why would I want to live forever? And
it's interesting you've said about the asking the 20 people, none of them wanting to live forever, because there's actually it's a slightly sort of strange book to recommend in therapy. But have you ever heard of the magician Darren Brown?
Yeah.
So he writes a couple of books on philosophy and his favorite philosophers and stuff, and he actually asked the same question about would you want to live forever, and comes to the same conclusion that actually no, it would just be the loss of everything and everyone that you love.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have the most wonderful life. A lot of us lead a wonderful life, love and just I don't want that to change, basically.
Yeah.
I just would love to live my life and know I've lived a good life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think something else you highlight in the book, which is really important because it's not something that people consider, is that loss and grief are actually not always around death. They can be other things.
Yeah. Yeah. That was really important to me to highlight. Yeah. Because, yeah, you're exactly right. You know, the loss of a house, the loss of a job, loss of your mental health, you know, all of those are losses, and we grieve those losses. You know, I don't know about you, I've lost jobs where I've come home crying because I've been made redundant or something, and it's a loss. So I'm grieving. And I know there's a couple of stories in there which is exactly that, especially around mental health, and one of them where, you know, there was this loss of self, you know, and that was just as much as losing a person. You know, it meant that much to the person. So yeah, incredibly important.
And some of the, because I'm also a coach as well as a counsellor, and actually I've coached a few people around when they have lost a job, good jobs, and not been able to go back in at the same level, and they do, you know, because they identify more as what they are instead of who they are. Sometimes that is a real loss to them because it's a loss of identity.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what we've been through as well as a nation, with, you know, with the pandemic as well in 2020. You know, there was obviously a lot of bereavement during that time. There was also a lot of loss. You know, people were losing their jobs, they were losing their houses.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was so much loss. You know, but we focused as a nation on the bereavement, and rightly so, don't get me wrong. But in the background, there was so much going on that not a lot of people were seeing, you know, unless you were the one experiencing it.
Yeah, Jo, it's really interesting that, because actually for both my wife and I, we fundamentally carried on as normal because we both, obviously as a therapist, I got a medical exemption to carry on working, although most of it went online. And because my wife was a key worker, she kept going to work, although work from home when she could. But actually the loss was the change of everything else for us, because we still went about our day-to-day life, but actually there was no way of the things that we would do to relax, and, you know, same for everybody, were taken away. So we were still doing the work, but actually everything else was gone, and that in itself was a loss.
Absolutely. Normal went out the window.
Yeah.
You know, so we joke about the title of this book, Back to Normal. We can't go back to normal.
No.
Even now, we cannot go back to normal because it's changed how we work. It's changed how we are as people, you know.
And it has.
Not physically, but mentally as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you say that, because I was talking to somebody else the other day, and there has been a shift in society since the pandemic. I'm not sure what it is, but you can see it, and I was going to say feel it, but I don't mean it in any kind of weird way. But you can see it, you can feel it.
So yeah, I don't think I could put my finger on it. I think you're right. I don't think I could explain what the change is, but there is a change.
But there is a change. Yeah, it certainly it feels like that. It just feels as if everything is just slightly different, almost off, as if it's just been rotated slightly, and it doesn't feel like it will ever go back to normal. But then, yeah. Okay.
But then again, what is normal?
But then again, what is normal? Absolutely.
That's the big question, isn't it? What is normal? What do we class as normal?
And there is no such thing, is there? It's really a myth that we tell ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I joke in this book, you know, we don't go back to normal because normal doesn't exist after a loss. It's just the new normal. That's my favorite word. But then I will be talking to people and I will say, oh, well, back to normal, you know, and I will use the word normal.
Yeah.
So it's just a natural thing to talk about. Definitely.
Well, I suppose if you wanted to try and quantify it, you could say that normal is a routine that we grow used to, isn't it? And then it changes. But of course, that routine changes all the time, but it isn't so sudden as when we experience a bereavement or a loss of some kind.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree.
So focus on the book, but a slightly different part of it. Do you read your own reviews? Because I know that some authors do and some don't.
Yes, I do. I'm not going to sit here and deny it. Of course I do. But I'll pick and choose. But I've been very lucky. All of my reviews have been very good. So I have been very, very lucky. But yeah, I think it's a curiosity. And, you know, the saying, curiosity kills the cat.
Yeah.
I don't think I couldn't not look because it would drive me mad. But I have been very lucky. to get some good reviews. And yeah, I've been lucky in that sense. But yeah, my answer is yes. I'm not even going to try and deny it.
I think most people do. I think some people say they don't, but I think most people have a little look. Yeah.
I want to sit and go, no, they don't bother me. I didn't do it for that. Of course they mean a lot. And especially, the good reviews. If I always said when I wrote both books, actually, but probably more so this one, is that if it helps one person, then it's worthwhile. And if you get 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, 100 reviews and people are saying it helped, that's amazing. And that to me is why I read them. If I can hear that and get that validation, I guess is the word of going, yeah, it's made a difference to one person. Absolutely. That's made it all worthwhile.
And what was I should have asked you this really. What was the publishing experience like for you?
Different for both books. It's
Okay.
very, very difficult. When you're an unknown publisher, writing a book or a publisher, it's really, really difficult. And there are so many companies out there that will take advantage of that. So the first one I did go through a publishing company, so to speak. And I'm not going to say it was a great experience. I'm not going to lie, it wasn't. Did they do what they said they were going to do? Yes, they did. It wasn't a great experience. Second time round, self-published.
Yeah.
And so much easier, so much better. You're in control and it's a lot better. But do I regret anything? Absolutely not. Because when you're a new author, you have no experience of doing this. If I was to write another one, I think I would self-publish again, because I just think that is a nice way to go. Unless there's any good publishers out there that that will take on my book, and then I'll be very happy to have that conversation. But it is really hard if you've not written a book before and you don't know the process. It's really, really difficult, but it is possible because people like me do it. So
yeah, I think the self-publishing route seems to be becoming more popular. I mean, I know a couple of people. They're not in the therapy world, but they are authors, and they self-publish mainly because they can then maintain control of their material and what happens with it, and up to a degree. I wouldn't say they still have full control even with the self-publishing route, but mostly they have control then.
You do normally have to give up some rights if you go with a company. That's in any book, and that's even with the pop stars of this world that release books and stuff like that. They're the same, but it's just it is difficult. It is very difficult, but it's so worthwhile. And if you can stick with it, and if you can keep going and believe that you can do it, it's possible.
So on that, will there be another book? Is there another book in the works?
No, this is what I tell you and tell my husband. It's probably going to be two very separate answers here. I've said no, but I know it's yes.
Okay.
I've got one in mind, but I don't know yet. But it's a time thing as well. Sure. I think it'll be next year before I kind of start edging it out. But I think I'd like to go down a novel route as well, but still within grief and bereavement.
Yeah.
But maybe down the novel route.
Oh, okay.
I don't know, but yeah, my answer is yes, but to be continued.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and actually, you spoke about how that before we started recording how busy you are. I can understand that there will be some time before anything else comes along here.
Yeah, but then again, I love writing, and the process of writing the books I loved it. I loved every single minute. I used to take myself off to coffee shops with my laptop. I have several coffees, but I'd sit in a corner of a coffee shop just tapping away, and it was relaxing, and it was for the soul. It was amazing, absolutely amazing. So I kind of miss that.
Yeah, and is that what the writing process is like for you? Is it? Do you like? Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely love it, and I have to be. If I'm not in the mood, don't pick up my laptop, because the words won't come out. It will be forced. I like it to kind of just be what I'm thinking, and then that tends to work better for me. But sitting in a coffee shop for a couple of 3 hours is my kind of heaven, really. I'm not going to lie. And
do you are you kind of very hit and miss, or do you set yourself kind of a day where you will write as long as the inspiration's there, or do you just as and when?
Yeah, as and when. It's 'cause some days I put my laptop and just type away. Some days, things would be going on in the background and I wouldn't be able to concentrate, so I wouldn't even begin. So yeah, it was as and when, and that worked.
Yeah,
Well, it
good.
worked for me anyway.
No, it's interesting because I think a lot of people say that. You said kind of, you sit down and write and see what comes out. And I know quite a few people that have, I mean, I think one of the this is not therapy related at all, but Douglas Adams, who wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, he was halfway through a book when he passed away, which was called The Salmon of Doubt. And I'm fairly sure he wasn't even certain what that book, which series that book was going to be in yet. So yeah, he just literally what came out was what came out. Yeah.
And that was the thing, obviously I had the stories before I wrote the book because I did the stories first. So I kind of knew where I was going with it, which made it easier, I think, because I was able to kind of put them into some sort of logical order in a way, and then get them to flow and mingle together a little bit.
Yeah.
So I guess from that aspect, it was easier. But then in the same breath, it was difficult because I did want them to link. I didn't want to just chop and change and go from one story to the next, and for the reader to kind of be reading one thing and then completely go on to a different subject. I did want that flow throughout this. So yeah, I actually loved the process. I'm not going to lie. I absolutely loved it. And yes, I will do it again at some point.
Some point.
I just don't want to say that out loud because my husband would probably kill me.
Yeah, she will do it again, but maybe when you've got slightly more free time.
Yeah, because he tells me off for being so busy. So he's like, Jo, just slow down. Then, a couple of hours on Sunday, I could have got my laptop out then and just tapped away at something. But I have promised him at least next year. That's my promise to him.
There we go. And so kind of the final question, any advice that you would give anybody that's trying to write their own book?
Just write from the heart. Don't force it. If you believe in what you're writing, it will come naturally. And it really is that simple. Just kind of have a good idea where you wanted to take it, but then don't be limited to that, because it may go in a completely different pathway and it may go in a completely different way to what you think, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. So have something in mind with it and then just follow where your kind of mind takes you.
I think that happens for a lot of people. And I've got a friend who got halfway through book 2 of a trilogy they were writing, and then just stopped and started writing something else. And I was like, "What are you doing?" And they're like, "Well, I've just got inspiration for this, so I'm going to shelve that and do this." And I was like, "Okay, well, that's yeah."
If you don't do that, it becomes, I'm trying to think of the word, forced.
Yes. Yeah.
And then you lose that authenticity of the writing. So I think the minute you cross over is where you do need to stop. And that's the days what I just said, where I just stopped or didn't pick up my laptop, because it would have felt as if I was just talking. And I didn't want it. I wanted to convey the feelings and the emotions and be true to what, because at the end of the day, what we've got to remember is in this book, people have shared their stories. And I felt, although I felt very privileged to share their stories, I also wanted to do them justice, because this is their life in this book, and they've been so brave to share these stories. And I wanted to do them justice. So I had to give it the time it deserved. And if that meant a couple of extra months, it meant a couple of extra months, because that's what was right to do.
I was actually going to ask you a little bit about the editing process, but I suppose because this one's self-published, it's a little bit different. But because they're such personal stories, I was going to ask you, did you feel that anything was taken away in the editing process? But because you were self-published, I suppose you kept control of that.
Yeah. And the stories from the contributors are pretty much as they wrote it and as they told me. I tried not to change absolutely anything. The only things I changed were areas where it's maybe identifiable. I went to Devon on the 2nd December this year, and I was like, can we just say in the winter? We changed it that way. I would change grammar, which you do in a book anyway. That's the only thing. But I tried to keep it as close to their words as I could, because if you change it, then it's my story, not theirs.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's their story. So I did try to stick to that throughout the book.
And did you do you have like a group of beta readers who kind of gave you feedback in that?
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
got a couple of very good friends who are amazing. And I was like, have you got a spare few hours just to kind of proofread this? And they were amazing and used to come back to me and say, well, this doesn't make sense or this doesn't flow. I'd take this out, but I'd leave that in with my bit of writing. And they were amazing. You know, because what happens when you're writing is sometimes you don't see the wood for the trees. So you can read a paragraph again and again and again, but you won't notice that there's a spelling mistake in there or there's a grammatical error in there. And then somebody will point it out and you think, wow, that's so obvious. Yeah. But you go into this train of thought and you don't see it. So they were amazing at saying, what on earth do you mean, Jo? That makes no sense whatsoever. What are you trying to say? And then I go, I'm trying to say this. And they're like, well, say that then.
Yeah,
so they
and
were
I
great.
have to admit, I even like with academic pieces or blog posts, when I use a piece of software to have them read back to me because I'll read it 100 times and it says what I want it to, and then I'll hear it and I'll be like, what? What's that supposed to say?
Do you know what? Going back to your question about advice for other authors, that's something I would actually highlight. Actually, you're right to bring that up, because what really helped me is reading it out loud. Actually physically reading it as if I was reading it out to somebody. So as long as, you know, get a quiet house, so, you know, you run your own, you're not going to have interruptions, that helps, because then you really do hear your own words. So if you are writing a book, put it into chunks. Don't read the whole book in one go, but just break it down into chapters and literally read it out loud, and that's dead helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good piece of advice, because actually, I suppose then you see how it flows, don't you? As if you're talking then, because actually sometimes it's that you said it, not seeing the wood for the trees, which is very true, because you can just get lost in your own work sometimes and be like, I've gone round in a bit of a circle here. I'm not sure what it's meant to say anymore.
Yeah, you can overthink sometimes, you know, and when you do, that's when you need to stop and just take a step backwards, because you just need to do it properly. So, but I hope I did it justice. I mean, that was my main thing. As long as I did it justice for the contributors. And at the centre of this as well is Jay. You know, because he's the beginning of this story.
You definitely did. I mean, you balanced it so well. Your own stories, your own story, the stories of others, and just the way it was presented, it really flowed. Like I said, I read it in one sitting because it wasn't hard to read. It's nice reading, and you've approached such a difficult subject in such a heartfelt way that it's although there is pain in it, there is hope, but it's easy to read, and not because it's not painful, because there are parts in there that do make you want to weep, but actually it's easy to read
because it's real.
Yes, yeah, it relates to being a human being.
Yeah, it's like a documentary in a book almost, if you think about it. You know, it's like a real life documentary on the TV, just written down, because these are real people. You know, so that's what we've got to remember here, is these aren't made up. These are real people, real lives, real illnesses, real experiences, and, you know, and that's what makes it real.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're about done, Jo. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you ever so much for chatting to me. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.